Well, a little earlier than normal, we're coming up to our Live on Live segment of the programme, but that means we've got a lot to talk about today. And the topic today is shaken baby syndrome. A team of investigative journalists in the United States that probes criminal justice issues, including potentially wrongful convictions, has cast doubt on whether a young mother sent to prison for shaking her baby to death is in fact guilty. Tanya Miller was convicted in the state of Michigan over the second-degree murder of her daughter Alicia back in 2003. Now, she's currently serving a 20 to 30-year prison sentence. But the Medill Justice Project, part of the Medill Northwestern University in Illinois, says its research suggests that other factors could be to blame for Alicia's death. Following a 9-month investigation, the team has produced a short documentary and a podcast to tell Tanya's story. Now, to talk about this, I'm joined in the studio by reporter Adele Humbert, who's a member of the Medill Justice Project team. Thank you very much, Adele, for coming into the studio today.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Adele, before we talk about Tanya Miller and her case, let's first get some background on the work being done by the Medill Justice Project. You identify yourselves as journalists, not advocates. Who are you exactly, and what do you hope to achieve?
So the Medill Justice Project is an award-winning national center of investigative journalism, and it's based at Northwestern University, and it was created in 1999. And so what we aim to do is to investigate potentially wrongful convictions. So we are a team of students and professional journalists working together and investigating potentially wrongful convictions in criminal cases.
Now, just on the case that the project was set up back in 1999, when I was looking into and researching this with my colleague Amanda Morrow, it struck me that the setting up of the project came 2 years after the very famous Louise Woodward case, which was televised. It was one of the biggest media trials, if not the biggest, of the 1990s. Was there any link between what happened with the Woodward case and maybe the foundation of the Medill project after that? Or is it just a coincidence?
Well, definitely. I think that the Medill Justice Project has been investigating, child abuses in general for a couple of years now, and when shaken baby syndrome, this specific case,
the Tanya Miller case,
Louise Woodward case,
or the Louise Woodward case,
was started to raise attention. I think Alec Klein, the director of the Medill Justice Project, wanted to focus on shaken baby syndrome cases, and he realized that there was a lack of information and resources available to the public. Mm-hmm. So that's why he wanted to create a database available to the public on the Medill Justice Project website.
Now, we're talking today about shaken baby syndrome, but there have also been cases of mistrials and miscarriages of justice for cot deaths and people being accused of cot deaths. I mean, can you distinguish between now how maybe a coroner can say, oh, that was a cot death or that was a shaken baby syndrome? I mean, is there a distinct pathology that can be followed?
So shaken baby syndrome is a very technical issue, medical issue, and a very controversial topic in the United States and in general. Some medical experts think that we can find 3 specific symptoms on the autopsy of the baby that are brain bleeding, brain swelling, and bleeding behind the eyes of the baby. So if we find these 3 specific symptoms, that means the baby was shaken to death.
Has been physically abused, basically.
Exactly, and so that's why we call it abusive head trauma. But in the recent years, some other medical experts realized that the same symptoms can be found on the baby for many other reasons, and sometimes for reasons that cannot be explained.
Okay. Now let's look into the Tanya Miller case. That case is part of a wider probe into the syndrome and cases of it in the United States. But it's an issue that you yourself personally have been working on since 2012, and something to come out of your research is a comprehensive database of cases. I mean, there is a map on the website where you can see the concentrations county by county across the United States of the syndrome cases. Can you tell us about that and why that database was created?
So, so first of all, I started to work for the Medill Justice Project this summer.
Oh, excuse me. Okay.
And my work really focused on Tanya Miller case. But we used the database as a resource to make more information available to the public.
Now, okay, let's then focus on the specific case of Tanya Miller. This is also, her case is the subject of an audio report that was recently turned into a podcast that we were listening to over the last few days. And she herself was 18 when she was accused of shaking her baby to death. The autopsy results found that Alicia died as a result of brain trauma, as you described, from shaken baby syndrome. But 13 years later, Miller still remains in prison. That's almost most of her adult life. But the Medill report says that questions remain over what happened to Alicia, who died when she was less than 12 weeks old. Now, what are some of the unanswered questions in this case?
So that was a very interesting case to work on. My colleague and co-worker Taylor Mullaney and I investigated the case this summer, and in like 3 months, we uncovered very key elements that were never mentioned at trial, especially about the health of the baby. Tanya Miller told us that she tried to go and see the doctor a couple of times because she was concerned about the health of her baby, but the doctor didn't really help her because every single time she would take the doctor take the baby to the doctor. The baby was fine. But she told us, and other people, we interviewed some of her family members, some of her friends who witnessed the baby having kind of seizures. The baby would...
So the baby was already suffering from symptoms of some anomaly, of some description that were not normal for a child of up to 12 weeks of age.
It seems like there were many concerns about the baby. Feeding. The baby had feeding issues, breathing issues.
And why were these issues that occurred and that were registered and witnessed by friends and family, why were these not taken on board by the courts at the time?
That's a very good question, and that's why we...
Was it a jury trial?
Yes, it was a jury trial. And that's why we thought that Alec Klein took the case and thought there were enough questions and it would worth investigating the case.
Now, you have met Tonya in prison. She's 33 years old now, and you're hoping to see her released. What are your impressions of her as a person? I mean, do you, apart from the research that you've done, do you feel from having met her that she is innocent?
So, as a journalist, my role is not to say she's guilty or she's not guilty. I'm not an advocate. But again, my role is to uncover new elements that can be used as potential new evidence to go by pro bono lawyers or by advocates to go and see the judge to maybe reopen the trial. That's my goal. And then when I met Tanya, you need to understand something. When we started investigating the case, we had literally piles of documents and medical records and police records to read before we even meet Tanya, because we needed to understand everything about the case and the chronology of the events. So when we met Tanya, it was during our second trip to Michigan. And to me, it's funny because I felt like I had read so much about her and I had done so many interviews.
You already knew her.
That I felt like I already knew her. That was the very surprising thing to me.
So now that you've looked into the case, you've gone through those piles and piles of documents as you described. I mean, it's almost like something out of a Hollywood film. You can imagine you all around with cups of coffee at 4 a.m. going through these piles of paper. But what are your aims now? Is it simply just for a fresh look at her case, for the judges to reopen the case? What is the aim now?
I think we uncovered enough elements to raise questions and to
Both legal and medical.
yes, and to make the people aware of this issue, and I think it's maybe an uncovered issue, shaken baby syndrome, and second, I think our goal now is to see pro bono lawyers and advocates using these elements and make something with it.
Yeah, so to put it together and use it as a plan of attack, basically, to have our case reheard, I suppose.
Exactly.
That's it.
To me, my goal as a journalist is always to do meaningful work and try to tell stories that can have an impact on real people's lives.
Well, when you met her yourself, what did she have to say? Did she explicitly say that she'd never shaken her child? Did she explicitly say that the child had already had problems? I mean, did she look back, with hindsight and say, look, there was already a problem there? What did she have to say about the incident itself, about her child's death?
So you need to also understand that when she was sentenced, she was 19, and when her baby died, she was 17 years old. So she was a teenager. But 13 years later, when we interviewed her in prison, she still had the same things to say. She was sure that the baby had some health issues, and she told us that she tried several times to take her to the doctor, but I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry, I don't want to be cutting it, but how is her mental health? If you've spent 13 years in a prison for a crime that you haven't committed, you're 13 years, you're in a woman's prison, you'll be accused of being a baby killer, which is almost like being accused of, of being a child rapist in a male prison. I don't know, there's a stigma there to it. How is she physically? How does she come across?
She was very calm, and you can tell that to me, she was a person who really think about her actions, and it was interesting because to me, the contrast between the person I had in front of me and the person who was described during the trial by the prosecutor was there was a big contrast.
There were two very different people.
Two different people, because the prosecutor described her as being very emotionless and had... the exact quote was flat emotion during the trial, but you can tell that she actually got emotional when we were with her, and when we asked her very specific questions about the death of her baby's death. So to me, that was very interesting.
Now, who are you? You've created this podcast. It's about 30 minutes long. It's a very, very interesting production about what happens to these babies who die in infancy. It's a walkthrough of Babyland. It's quite harrowing stuff. But who for one do you hope will listen to this podcast? And who's the intended audience? Who is your target to actually get the message through to about this?
So I think that the Medill Justice Project aims at targeting academics, lawyers, advocates, basically people involved in promoting human rights. For this specific case, I think we want to make sure that the audience is as large as possible, and that's why I produced the podcast both in English and in French, because I think that it's important to make the people aware of these issues.
Well, indeed, as we were talking earlier, it's an infamous case at this stage that came out of Uganda about 12 months ago that was posted across social media about a nanny in a house, in a home in Kampala, who was filmed abusing a child there. And across Africa, and with a lot of affluent African families, and also people who are living across Africa, when they're off to work, they will always have nannies or dadas, as they might be called in East Africa, in Swahili, who will come in and look after the child, but they're not necessarily experienced people. I mean, is this, in your opinion, a strong message that also has to be driven home to people over in Africa who are allowing their kids to be looked after by unprofessional people?
Definitely, I think shaken baby syndrome is a very important topic, and by producing the podcast in French, our hope is that the podcast, the story, will be listened to into African countries, but also Canada, and yeah, the more people will listen to the story, and the more hope we have that the story will have an impact on people's lives.
Okay, well, look, my thanks there to reporter Adele Humbert from the Medill Justice Project. And you can listen to the full podcast here on RFI this weekend. That's the documentary that'll be coming across on Saturday, that's January the 14th at 1700 hours Universal Time. And again on Sunday, January the 15th at 15:30 Universal Time. Adele, thank you very much for being on the programme today.
Thank you, David.